HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Critic's Daughter, a Memoir, by Priscilla Gilman. Read by Priscilla Gilman. Irina, sobbing. Where? Where has it all gone? Where is it? Oh, my God, my God. I have forgotten everything. Forgotten everything. Everything is confused in my head. I am forgetting everything. I forget more every day. And life flies past and never returns. Never. And we will never go to Moscow. I see now that we will never go. Anton Chekhov, Three Sisters. That is what the highest criticism really is. The record of one's own soul. Oscar Wilde, The Critic as Artist. Everything that's gone before, reaching back to the first moments, all the excitements and subsidings, the musings and expostulations, the innocent or calculated assertions, the flurries of encounter and withdrawal, the little enactments and disclosures of self, the tears and joys, the histories and prospects. All this flowers now into aesthetic logic. The end toward which these means have been moving is taking shape. Richard Gilman, Chekhov's Plays, An Opening into Eternity. I lost my father for the first time when I was 10 years old. In the months and years that followed, I lost him over and over, many times, and in many different ways. This book is my attempt to find him. Prologue. I'm in a darkened Broadway theater at a revival of The King and I on a balmy evening in the summer of 2015. The production is sumptuous and beautifully sung. The show is stirring and delightful, and my spirits soar with the music. But then, the song Something Wonderful begins, and I'm undone. Sung by Lady Tiang, the king's long-suffering head wife, to Anna Leonowens, the tutor brought from England to teach the king's children. Something Wonderful is an impassioned plea to accept the king as he is, and not desert him, despite his many faults. With the simultaneous realism about his flaws and a deep belief in his virtues, Lady Tiang is trying to convince Anna, bothered by the king's peevishness, put off by his egotism, and frightened of his volatility, to give him another chance. Her attempt to acknowledge his darkness but recognize his worth, to plead for mercy and forgiveness, ravages me. I am heaving with sobs. Tears wet the front of my silk summer dress and drip onto the program I'm clutching. Willing myself to stifle the sobs, I let out an involuntary moan, and head swivel. I drop my head into my lap, thinking of my father. It hits me in that instant that the king has always represented my father to me. Peremptory but playful, immensely powerful but incredibly vulnerable. Witty and smart, but naive and quixotic. My father, in many ways the quintessential intellectual and a deeply cerebral man, was nonetheless a man who thought with his heart. He was an idealist. He was a romantic. He was fun and charming and charismatic, sweet and adorable and endearing. Like the king, he was hampered by pettiness and petulance. Like the king, he was both an autocrat and a radical. He wanted to do and be good, but his limitations, his rage, his defensiveness, his insecurities, had hindered and hampered him at every turn. He was a man who stumbled and fell, but he was a man who tried. Something wonderful is sung again at the end of the show when the king has died. The death of that king, the strong man brought low, the powerful monarch reduced to a frail and mortal body, had always devastated me. Just like my father, he was a man on the brink of a breakthrough, but was felled before he could achieve it. All of Lady Tang's devotion couldn't save him. All of Anna's influence couldn't save him. It was too late. I saw myself in Lady Tang, ardently pleading with Anna to see the king holistically as more than just his temper and his weaker moments. All my life, I'd sung a version of Something Wonderful about my father to my mother. But unlike Lady Tang with Anna, I had never managed to convince my mother to give my king a chance, acknowledge his virtues, see beyond his flaws. She hadn't relented. She still shuddered when she spoke of him. She still dismissed my missing him as obsessive. I needed my mother to acknowledge my father's virtues. I needed her to see him in the round. But I also saw myself as Anna, frustrated and saddened and exhausted by a demanding and mercurial man, be he my father or romantic partners over the years. What had been the price of telling difficult and depressed men they were wonderful, over and over again, because they needed my love? Of protecting them when they were wrong? What was the cost of such protection? And how could I be both Anna, critical, ethical, self-protective, and Lady Tang, loyal, empathetic, loving? On that night of overwhelming sadness in the theater, I realized that I had never been allowed, and in some ways had never allowed myself, to truly grieve my father or reckon with his legacy to me. And now I knew I must. I am haunted by my father. He has made me the thinker, writer, parent, human that I am. Brought me to my knees. Led me into dangerous romantic entanglements. Buoyed me during times of crisis, informed my reading and writing and parenting in ways I am only now realizing. I am both drawn to and wary of places, people, works of art that will touch that sore spot in me, unleash that tide of sadness. In college, I studied the literature of trauma. We read of how those who suffer trauma experience a bewildering discontinuity, an absolute break between before and after, and spend their lives attempting to mediate that gap. We explored how the traumatized both yearn to be free of their pain, heal their wound, and resist forgetting, healing, getting over it. The grief has stopped me in my tracks time and time again. Years after my father's death, a street corner in New York City, a clip from Singing in the Rain, a song from West Side Story, a tender note from a former student of his could send me into unstoppable crying. I hated his smoking when he was alive, but after he died, cigar and cigarette smells made my knees buckle. I have struggled against the flood of tears that threatened to engulf me as I prepared to teach a class on The Assistant, a book he loved by a dear friend of his. or read a Paddington book to my younger son. My sister, too, was subject to these irrational eruptions of grief. A few years ago, she saw my father's friend, Andre Gregory, he of My Dinner with Andre and Vanya on 42nd Street, at a public reception. And as she walked up to say hello, she found herself bursting into tears. Was it simply seeing one of our father's close friends? Was it seeing one of the last of a dying breed of eccentric artists and intellectuals? Was it his kind, welcoming smile, the way he reminded her of our father? 15 years after my father died, at age 83, in a suburb of Kyoto, Japan, he is disappearing faster and faster. His friends, colleagues, adversaries, compatriots are almost all gone. His New York City is disappearing. Middle-class Flatbush, Brooklyn, where he grew up. The bohemian, literary, electric West Village where he lived as a young man. Industrial and still unchic Soho, where he moved in with my mother and brought me home from the hospital in May of 1970. The liberal, affordable, and diverse Upper West Side of rambling, rent-controlled pre-war apartments inhabited by therapists and academics and artists, where my parents raised me and my sister. The then slightly sketchy neighborhood near Columbia University, where he ended up after my parents divorced. I walk the city streets in search of him, and am turned away and turned off by glistening, imperious apartment towers, by one Duane Reade or bank or expensive clothing store after another, moving in to replace small businesses, mom and pop stores, bookstores. How horrified my father would be by the loss of New York City's edge, affordability, neighborhood stores, diversity, and artistic fecundity. As one by one, my father's colleagues, friends, enemies, and now even his students die, as many of his books go out of print, as his life recedes into the distance, I wonder not how he will be remembered, but increasingly, if he will be remembered. Or will he simply vanish? I feel an urgency that drives me onward in search of traces, spirits, glimmerings. This book is an attempt at exorcism, at the same time that it is a plea to be haunted. I don't want my father's light, the light that emanated from him, the light he had access to die away and fade into the light of common day. I don't want my father's voice, sensibility, values in darkness lost, the darkness of the grave. And yet I must look at him critically, too. I must acknowledge that he wasn't always wise, that he stumbled and fell, that his weaknesses made him difficult to handle and sometimes difficult to love. How he would hate a sentimental or sanitized portrait of the complicated and unclassifiable man he was. As his daughter, I have the privilege, or the burden, of making the final assessment of my father's life. And my loyalty is at stake. Loyalty in a critic, Bernard Shaw wrote, is corruption. From the true critic, the theater generally gets what can only be interpreted as gross infidelity. The reason being, as Shaw and every other major observer of drama makes abundantly clear, and as our own sense of what is civilized should tell us, that the critic cannot give his loyalty to men and institutions, since he owes it to something a great deal more permanent. He owes it, of course, to truth and to dramatic art. Richard Gilman, The Necessity for Destructive Criticism, 1961. In this early essay, one of his first major pieces, my father laid out both an intellectual defense of his profession and a manifesto reflecting his larger approach to life. He insisted that the highest form of love demands rigorous honesty. He never whitewashed, never tiptoed around, never equivocated or resorted to euphemism when giving his opinion or rendering his judgments. Can I attain that level of truth-telling and rigor in my own reflection on my father? Can I see him clearly, but with compassion? How can I be at once truthful and loyal, both to him and to my mother, who bitterly divorced him and remained hardened against him until his death? Can I make an act of bracing honesty also an act of love? Am I betraying him if I reveal his flaws, his weaknesses, his sins, to use his own Catholic language? Alternatively, am I betraying his critical standards if I put too romantic a sheen on him? For despite his elevation of truth as the highest critical value, despite his emotional openness, he hid things, kept secrets, told lies. My father's sense of human beings as flawed, frail, imperfect creatures, his resistance to black and white judgments, is exemplified in his claim that Chekhov's devils have at least the rudiments of wings, and his angels the beginnings of horns. How can I hold on to the best of what he taught me, do him justice, depict him in all his messy, complex, contradictory being, with neither wings nor horns? When biography enters the realm of interiority, syntax always has to use the conditional, and thought can only be speculative. In conjectures like these, we're asked to stretch sympathy and shrink credence, to trust our intuition, sometimes against likelihood. Richard Gilman, Chekhov's Plays, An Opening into Eternity. As I attempt to portray my father, to understand him, as I enter the realm of his interiority, I will resist labels and categories, pronouncements and declarations. I will use the conditional. I will stretch my sympathy and trust my intuition. And as he wrote about interpretations of Ibsen, mysteries will remain, as they should. I don't want to solve the mystery, or lay bare the reality, or provide a definitive account of my father. Even as I strive to capture him, I will remind myself of the virtues and value of his remaining elusive, unable to be resolved or solved. Act 1. Apparelled in celestial light. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. William Wordsworth, Ode, Intimations of Immortality. And so I start, picking out memories, sifting and sorting, trying to reconstruct past time and vanished states of mind, and to construct, on the slippery site of language and with its recalcitrant tools, at least the shape of what happened, its difference from what didn't. Richard Gilman, Faith, Sex, Mystery, a Memoir. My first memory of all is also my first memory of my father. I'm 3 years old, it's a hot summer night in Spain, and a loud, dramatic thunderstorm has awakened me. I must have cried out in terror, because the memory begins with my father, behind me, at my bedroom window. The two of us gazing out into the stormy night. Framed by the window, the scene before us is like a little theater. The garden behind our rental house, strangely unfamiliar. The dark blue night sky, intermittently scored with silvery streaks of lightning. With one arm wrapped around me, the other gesturing skyward, my father narrates what we're seeing and hearing. "Look at the tree," he exclaims as the wind whips its branches. "And thunder," he cries in a thrillingly dramatic voice. He shows me how the lightning lights up corners of the garden, makes different kinds of seeing possible, uncovers things we haven't noticed before. He never explicitly soothes me or calms me. He doesn't say reassuring things. He doesn't comfort me. But in his presence, with his voice in my ear and his arm around my waist, my fear melts away. My father didn't give me a hug and a kiss and send me back to sleep. He brought me to the window. In the face of the unexpected, the frightening, the disorienting, he was a madcap sportscaster, a wise sage, an ebullient enthusiast. As one arm embraced me, the other helped me face a world beyond him, a world of challenge and intensity and wonder. I don't think of myself as a critic or teacher either, but simply, and at the obvious risk of disingenuousness, as someone who teaches, writes drama criticism and other things, and feels that the American compulsion to take your identity from your profession, with its corollary of only one trade to a practitioner, may be a convenience to society, but is burdensome and constricting to yourself. Richard Gilman, from a 1970 New York Times article about his directing a play at Yale Repertory Theater. Despite my father's aversion to being categorized as a critic or teacher, he'd been the theater critic at Commonweal and Newsweek and taught at Yale Drama School from 1967 to 1997. He indisputably was a certain kind of New Yorker in the 1970s. Liberal, passionate, intellectual, clad in denim shirts or turtleneck sweaters, bell-bottom jeans or corduroys, sneakers or wallabies, a pack of cigarettes bulging out of one pocket or another, with black clunky glasses and wild curly hair, my father cut a dashing yet unpretentious figure. He was as at ease discussing the travails of the New York Giants as he was debating the merits of the latest Eric Rohmer film. He loved classic New York deli food, pastrami, pickles, corned beef sandwiches, Chinese takeout, pizza. He shopped at Zabar's, Barney Greengrass, H&H Bagels, and the local mom-and-pop stores in our Upper West Side neighborhood. He had next to no vanity about his appearance, bought cheap sneakers and jeans at an outlet store on Broadway, had his hair cut by our neighborhood barber, and exercised only when my mother cajoled him into playing doubles tennis with friends. He loved New York City's independent and used bookstores, its libraries, zoos, and museums. Central Park, where he pushed me and my 14 months younger sister Claire on precarious metal swings, bought us soft pretzels, and chased us up and down the rocks. Riverside Park, where he watched us zoom down slides and run through sprinklers. His idea of a great evening would include a poker game with cigar-smoking buddies, a spirited discussion of a novel or play, and reading aloud to his daughters. 13 years younger than my father, my mother, Lynn Nesbit, with her almond-shaped dark eyes, stick-straight jet-black hair, and slender, small-boned frame, had a piquant, gamine beauty. When I was born, she wore her hair long and parted in the middle, but around the time we began preschool, she cut it very short, which gave her a more professional air and a harder, less feminine edge. She wore elegant A-line shift dresses and fashionably clunky bead jewelry at work, cotton sundresses, bell-bottom jeans with clingy t-shirts or poncho sweaters, and skimpy bikinis on weekends. Unlike my father, who smoked and ate red meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, my mother watched what she ate, did Pilates at his studio several times per week, played tennis for hours, used a stationary bicycle set up in her and my father's bedroom while watching the news in the evenings, and jogged around the Central Park Reservoir to maintain her figure. The same discipline and intensity she brought to her diet and exercise regimens she demonstrated in her career. She'd come to New York from a tiny town in Illinois as a wide-eyed girl of 22, gotten a job as an editorial apprentice at Ladies' Home Journal, then a $75 a week job as the assistant to literary agent Sterling Lord. She worked as Lord's receptionist, typist, and file clerk, weighing his packages and stamping his letters. But by the time I was born, when she was 31, she'd risen to become a high-ranking agent at International Creative Management, representing icons of the new journalism from Tom Wolfe to Hunter S. Thompson. Cult literary figures, including Donald Barthelme, her first great love, who once referred to her as the mother of postmodernism. Robert Caro and Toni Morrison, whose first novel, The Bluest Eye, came out the year I was born. And Michael Crichton, who signed with her to do the Andromeda Strain and became a close friend and client for his entire career. Strong and capable, my mother always performed at a high level, whether it was in heated negotiations for her clients or in the kitchen before a dinner party for illustrious guests. We lived amidst stacks of The Nation, The New Republic, Partisan Review, The New York Review of Books, The Village Voice, and The New Yorker. Walls and walls of bookcases. Back copies of the New York Times Book Review and Times Weekend and Arts and Leisure sections, and pile upon pile of books, manuscripts, student papers. The soundtrack of my childhood, the theme songs from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, The Electric Company, and Sesame Street, Pete Seeger's voice, the tinkle of the Mr. Softy truck outside our window, and the aggressive, even frenetic.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?